Hello, boils and ghouls. Welcome to a very special interview episode of Tales From The Crypt. My name is Jason. Today, I'm joined by Fred Dekker, the writer of 5 Tales From The Crypt episodes, and he even directed one of them. He's also the writer and director of 80s classic, The Monster Squad. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let's start us off. Now, I know you talked about Monster Squad a lot. The Wolfman's Got Nard is a fantastic, encompassing documentary, but I want to go a little deeper on a couple things. So, obviously, besides the homage to Universal Monsters, were there specific films or stories that you were influenced by the characters and the plot when you wrote Monster Squad?
No, I think you've got a handle on it. I mean, those movies were seminal for me when I was a kid. And I loved them, and I thought, well, let's do a monster rally. I mean, to be honest, I love the first two Frankensteins are amazing. Everything after that is kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge. I love the idea of the Wolfman. I'm not sure that the movies are as good as the idea. But at the end of the day, I think Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is my favorite,
Right?
because of the blend of horror and humor, and so that was a big influence on me. Was nobody's seen a movie like this in a long time, at least since the '60s when Don Knotts did The Ghost of Mr. Chicken and stuff like that. So that was the big influence. But the other thing was to make the monsters actually true to the characters from the old Universal movies, so that there would be an edge to them to counterbalance the hijinks of the kids. So that was my goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Abbott and Costello was probably one of the most watched kids movies when I was a kid, and it just felt like he took the kids from the Goonies, put them in that movie, and set them off. Now, would you find that a horror comedy or kind of blending any serious genre with a comedy is a challenge? Because you could go too far one way or the other. So how did you go about finding that right balance?
Well, I think, Night of the Creeps was the same genre, my first film. And I think in both cases, for me, it's really about the humor being there as kind of a warm blanket to so that you're not threatened. Because a real horror movie, something like The Exorcist, it's threatening. It's actually unsettling. And I felt like, well, I didn't intend it to be a kids movie per se, but I did want it to be sort of, user friendly. The Monster Squad and Creeps too. They're kind of Saturday night sleepover movies. And I think the key for me is to take them seriously. You can have humor and you can have character comedy, but you have to play it straight. Otherwise, and this is my feeling about movies in general, I just really dislike movies that are all sort of winky, the Rocky Horror Picture Show and stuff. Like, isn't this cute? Winky, get it? A little of that goes a long way for me. So having a heart and a soul and a sense of, I hesitate to say reality, but something solid that you can say, well, that feels like real people to a degree. That's really what I was going for.
Now, one of the things I always love, for better or for worse, in this movie is how realistic the dialogue is. Because the bullies, they're mean, they're real mean, but the kids are like, they talk like kids would to each other, in the 80s and many others, and not as much now, I think, but I think it was very representative of the time. So how did you go about creating that realism? And was there any improv with the cast? Did you get
no improv whatsoever. Well, I had an ace in the hole. I had Shane Black writing the script with me. And from the very get-go, that was actually his first screen credit. I gave him his first job as a screenwriter, and he's returned the favor a couple of times. He brings that pulp element. Shane has read every detective and spy novel ever written, so he knows kind of how to negotiate that kind of wisecracking, crime kind of world, and that bleeds over to the kids. I mean, one of the things I love about the movie is the kids really don't talk like kids at all. They talk like, Borscht Belt comedians, and that's mostly because of Shane. And then I sort of followed his lead. I mean, there's a lot of that in Creeps too, which I wrote by myself. But I think it's about giving them personality and, keeping things fun and light so that when things get dark, it works. We're not making fun of the monsters. We're not doing a parody. We're going for broke. That was the tonal tightrope we were trying to walk.
Okay. And then one of my other favorite parts, coming on the other end of the spectrum, is the scary German guy character.
Yes.
Who just adds that like gut punch of reality to this. Can you talk about that? The inspiration for that character?
I have to be honest, Jason, a lot of the writing of the script was just very organic. I mean, it's not like we sat down and said, wouldn't it be cool if there was this? I mean, kids' literature and movies are full of the creepy guy down the street. Right. I mean, that's kind of a perennial, and so that was easy. But then adding the Holocaust reference, it's a good example of what I was talking about earlier. Is just putting a dose of reality so that the whole piece feels less disposable, I guess.
Yeah, that's one of my personal favorite moments of in that movie. I mean, there's so many great iconic moments of fun, but there's just that dose of reality is just really poignant and the kind of stuff you just don't see in those kind of movies. So I really like that.
And we went to some trouble, and I have to say Shane had a lot to do with this too, with making the family dynamic. There's the sense of the Crenshaw mom and dad. Marilyn Trainer and Stephen Mocht, maybe their marriage is not really in the best place right now. And in fact, right towards the end of the film, when all hell is breaking loose, you can see there's 3 suitcases in the foyer of the Crenshaw house.
I never noticed that.
Yeah. Next time you see the film. And so that was us just trying to, again, putting reality in a fantastical story, I think makes the story better. Always.
Yeah. No, that's a great screenwriting lesson right there. Now, if I have any criticism of the movie, it's really short, 82 minutes.
Yes.
Were there scenes that you cut out to get paced better, like expanding some of those things? Like they talk about going to marriage counseling, and I always wonder what that would have been like, and if a Frankenstein shows up at their marriage counselor.
I honestly can't remember if we had any scenes that we cut out per se. There were pieces of scenes that we cut out, but Peter Hyams was my mentor at that time and produced the movie, and he was always a very stern taskmaster. Like, if it doesn't work, get rid of it. So I think there may have been bits and pieces that we shot that we didn't use, but it was all in the service of momentum and pace and keeping the story moving.
Right, because this is one of those movies that you watch when you're younger, and then you're kind of taken in by it. Then when you watch it, revisit it later, you're like, there's things that you remember just because they're like tropes of those kind of movies. Like we expect like there'll be a point where the gang like breaks apart and then they have to come back together, but that never really happens. And
right,
and more.
Well, you got to understand that I'm older than you, so all of those tropes hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So Shane and I kind of made some of them, and then when you look at things after that, it's like, oh, that's kind of like in Monster Squad where this happened. Well, we weren't really copying. The 2 things we were copying were the Universal monster movies and the Hal Roach Little Rascals.
Okay.
And that was something that I loved as a kid, partly just because I love Laurel and Hardy. I loved the comics of the comedians of the 30s and 40s. But the idea that, and this was my experience, that after school, in between the release bell at the end of your school day, the dismissal bell, I should say, and dinner with your family, you were in your own world. You created your own reality, homework aside. And so we really doubled down on that. We love the idea that these kids just have their own little, they have their clubhouse, and they have their kind of rules of behavior, and it bonds them. And I think the movie's really about friendship in many ways.
Right. One of my highlights in the movie, I'm a huge Frankenstein fan, of all iterations, but the portrayal by Tom Noonan is just amazing, and just how emotional that character is, and vulnerable, and like heartfelt, and that every time the girl throws him her stuffy, because I have a daughter, I know there's nothing more precious to a little girl than her stuffy.
Yeah.
Just breaks my heart. And I was looking at his filmography, and he played Dalderhyde and Manhunter the year before this, and then he wanted to play the drug lord in RoboCop 2. Can you tell me about working with him and like his process? He just seems like such an interesting actor that hasn't really been given much spotlight.
Well, I was a huge fan of Manhunter, still am. It's one of my favorites. And that was really why I wanted to meet him. But I also knew that Dollarite is a sociopath, a psychopath. He's dangerous. So we got that going, because the Frankenstein monster, is to a degree dangerous. He's got a lot of strength, and he's angry because he'd never wanted to be born. So I sort of, even though Tom cut that cloth really well as kind of a creepy bad guy, the humanity of it was funny. I met with him, and he's a very interesting character, very serious actor, certainly the most serious actor in that movie. And we had moments where it was kind of like, I'm just this 26-year-old kid, and I'm dealing with a hugely talented method actor, and he would look at me kind of like, are you sure that's what you want, and that sort of thing. We had a couple of not fights, but what I said to him was, he goes, how do you see the Frankenstein monster in this movie? How do you see him? And I said, I see him as Lenny in Of Mice and Men. And Tom really liked that. And I think that's why he did the movie. And the key to it is, the humanity of this creature that's been pasted together from body parts, and the fact that he's conscious of that is really interesting. And that's something that I don't think even Karloff did. So that was really the key to it, is the humanity of his existence.
And then the Winston effects. I mean, Winston just owned, the 90s, and then the 80s, then into the 90s of, groundbreaking effects. And the Gill Man is the most impressive of that, or the iteration of that character.
Yeah. Well, I always liked the creature. And Stan designed it, and his boys there built it, and it was just, I'm really, really pleased with that creature. It's beautiful.
What was it like going on and then seeing these like in movement for the first time, seeing the creatures that you grew up watching come to life with Stan Winston effects?
It was pretty cool.
Now, obviously, everybody always wants more money to do more on these kind of movies. Were there things that you specifically had to scale back, or other ambitions that you had? I know the script obviously was a lot longer, in this first iteration.
Yeah. I mean, Shane had written a lot of kind of in the prologue, just more characters, more of the siege of Dracula's castle. But the fact that we could build that giant set, even those two sets, one, the catacombs where Dracula sleeps, and then the big sort of ballroom that we do in the opening. I mean, it really looks expensive, and Bradford May shot the hell out of it. It just looks great, and we used photo smoke and stuff like that. So it just feels like a giant movie. And there's also a matte shot of them outside the castle when you see it on the hill, and their horses are going up the hill, and that's basically two sets and a matte shot. but it's just goes to show you that, when you pick carefully what you show the audience, it can seem much bigger than it needs to be. So we didn't need, Shane had 100 guys on horseback and all that. And it's like, you know what? We don't need that.
Yeah, I love a good match shot, like a good 80s match shot.
Mm-hmm.
Just that detail just doesn't come through.
When you got one of the guys from ILM doing it for you, it's even better.
Right. I mean, I was watching like a making of thing from like Lord of the Rings and how all the miniatures and stuff and how great that looks. But even still, the match shots, when done well, and it's almost a shame now because when you see something like restored, it's almost like blown up to a point they weren't never really intending.
Right.
But they're just beautiful. They're just like pieces of work of arts.
Yep.
And
if it's good enough for Orson Welles, it's good enough for me.
That's true. Which of the kids do you think you relate to the most?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I was not sort of the ringleader at all. So I'm not Sean. And also Andre brings a kind of a leadership quality just because of who he is. So I'm definitely not Sean. Maybe I'm Patrick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I think that, probably Patrick.
Nice. And why do you think? Now, one of the things I've again watching the Wolfman's Got Nards. I watched it just a couple days ago, and it was so interesting to me the cyclical nature of thank you, nature of how this movie's like lifespan, where it comes out, obviously doesn't do as well at that exact moment for circumstances, and then finds life through HBO quietly, like almost like nesting in these minds of the kids that are staying up late. And then in the early 2000s there's this big explosion, and then they go through the re-releases and everything. Why do you think? And then then they have the documentary, and people are still raving about the movie. Why do you think it's kind of resonates so strongly with different audiences and different generations?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I don't know. I think it was probably considered. Well, it was two things. One, I think it was considered old-fashioned when it came out. I think it was. It wasn't particularly well reviewed. I think it didn't. You talk about the Goonies. The Goonies had Steven Spielberg going for it, and a lot more money spent to market it. And I think the similarities are sort of superficial, but I can understand where people would think that would draw a comparison. But the truth of the fact of the matter is the movie just did not do well. And it had to be discovered. And there's a lot of movies that are like that they don't find their audience for years. And so it was very heartbreaking for me. But thank God. I mean, the analogy I make is, you throw a rock into the, from a cliff into the water, and you don't hear the splash for 30 years.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And also, I think opening 2 weeks after Lost Boys really kind of cut into their audience.
Maybe. Well, Lost Boys was much edgier. It was much more of its time. I mean, Monster Squad, I don't think, apart from some of the wardrobe and some of the dialogue, it's not really an 80s movie, whereas Lost Boys is. We weren't trying to be cool.
Right. Except
the
for
80s, the 80s was a lot about trying to be cool.
Yeah. Though you do have a song at the end during the credits that recaps what happens in the movie, which is one of my favorite, cliches from the 80s and 90s. That always makes me happy.
That was not my choice, but God bless you.
That's interesting because I'm trying to do the math real quick in my head, but like I feel as if Monster Squad is almost as far back as like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was the time that it came out, the time that Monster Squad came out. Because that was 48. So that would have been about 40 years and about almost 40 years from Monster Squad. So
right.
That, I mean, not to make your brain hurt, but
my brain does hurt. My brain does hurt. I mean, the thing about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein that I think is really interesting is that Bud and Lou were the #1 box office earners in Hollywood for probably 15 years. They made like 2 or 3 movies a year, every year, from 1941 to 1950 or something like that. The monster films, I think, were kind of running out of gas, which is why Universal started pairing them up. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and then House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. Of course, I love these movies, where they have all the monsters together. So again, we were emulating a template that was 40 years old or more. And so it's not surprising that people didn't, break down the door to come see it, because they didn't know what it was.
Right. Yeah, and it's not like there was like an internet buzz or like, word of mouth was just your group of friends, and that was like contained to a town.
Exactly right. Also, the problem with movies that don't do well is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like if people go, "Hey, did you see that thing?" No, nobody's going to. If nobody else is going to go see that, I'm not going to go see it, which is the opposite of me, which is if I want to see something, I'm going to see it. And I'm sometimes happy when there's nobody in the theater because nobody's bothering me.
Right. But again, in the long scheme of things, this whole organic movement, and where it's like felt like it's very fan owned. People throw on the term cults, and I know in the documentary people kind of talk about what does really cult mean. I was thinking about this, and like in traditional terms, cult is a group of people who are very fanatic about a specific thing.
Yeah.
And and I think that does fit this movie, where people who will like Monster Squad really, 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 really like it, and they'll tell everyone until they're blue in the face about it.
Yep.
And unfortunately, and that had to start small, and then over the years spread wide.
Yeah. And it's great because I'll go to a screening somewhere of the movie, and it's got all its big moments. Wolfman's got nards, and they always work. And it's clear, well, the reason that's working so well is that everybody in this room has seen this goddamn thing 15 times. And that's kind of cool. I mean, obviously it would be exciting if it happened the first time, but it's affection. It's very similar to when I was a kid and the movies that I loved, passionately.
Yeah, it made me think of like the chicken jockey now, which I don't quite understand, but it is what it is.
What's the chicken?
It's from the Minecraft movie. Like people like shout out in the theater when it happens. Yeah, it's my kids did it when I took them to see it. I don't understand it, but it's like a thing that they're doing, and okay, fine. It's a singular moment.
If I weren't a dad, I would barely even know what Minecraft is. But I do barely know, but I don't know about the chicken jockey.
Yeah, and also speaking of like iconic moments, this is I was talking about this in our review, that this version of Dracula has to be like one of the meanest versions. He calls a little girl, a bitch. Yeah. And then he's throwing dynamite. And then my favorite moment, he blows up the treehouse, which is like shocking. And then he says, "Meeting adjourned." The
iconic treehouse.
Yeah. And meeting adjourned. And he throws dynamite under a cop car, and he's like twisting necks of police officers left and right. I'm like, geez.
Here's my question. How does he know that the squad have their meetings in that treehouse?
You tell me.
A, he blows up the treehouse because he knows it's important to them. And B, he says meeting adjourned. How does he know they have meetings there? Was he spying on them? That's an interesting movie moment, because he's telling us something we know. So we think, oh, how does he know? But you don't question it. It's like, well, how does he know?
I mean, if I was gonna like put my hat on, like obviously Dracula is known to have like psychic abilities, and the Frankenstein monster has been hanging out with the kids, so maybe he has some psychic link with Frankenstein. I'm just totally spitballing there, but
I love all that. But back to your stuff. But I went off on a tangent. What your question was the depiction of Dracula in this movie, and I've never loved the character of Dracula. I just find him kind of dull, which is strange. But the kind of romantic figure that appears in the dark and does nasty things to women by biting their neck and sucking their blood. That's very Victorian. So I never, vampires never much did it for me. So I said, well, if we're not going to play on the fact that he's a vampire, because we already know he's a vampire, what if he's a badass? What if he has a plan to get that amulet, and he just doesn't give a what it takes to get it? And so that was kind of our take, because Duncan Regehr is a very gentle, erudite, smart, wonderful man. I mean, if you meet him, he's the last guy you're going to think who's going to, pick up a kid and say, give me the amulet, you be. So that was the choice that we made. Let's make this guy badass.
Yeah, it's like you've never seen Dracula really go for world domination before.
Right. And Christopher Lee played it several times. And, I mean, that's probably as close as we've gotten. And certainly I think that the Hammer films had a little bit of an impact on me just because I'd seen them all. And they, like we did, took those classic Universal monsters and kind of reinvented them. So there was a precedent. Yeah.
I mean, and then you get more like into the comic book, like Blade type of Dracula characters, which are more like villain-esque.
Yeah. But then it's kind of becoming, more about the style and the edginess and
right.
Yeah, I don't think a black, leather jacket on a vampire is all that cool. I think you're trying too hard at that point.
Right. Well, and to go on the other side of the scale, have you seen Sinners?
I have seen Sinners, yes.
Yeah. What do you think of the vampire representation in that movie?
I thought it was great. I think it's, as a vampire movie, it's one of the greats. I just wish that From Dusk Till Dawn hadn't been made. Because I'm watching the movie and I'm going, this is cool. I love the first two acts. And then the vampires show up and I go, this is very, very organic. They did that well. Very scary, very bloody, very cool. But it's From Dusk Till Dawn.
Which isn't a bad thing. It's a great movie, at least for me. I thought it was.
I think Sinners is better, but I think Sinners would have been even better if it didn't resemble a Quentin Tarantino movie from 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean that was like one of my sleepover movies back in the day.
There you go. See that a lot of this has to do with how old we are when we find these things.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit. You were one of the most prolific writers on Tales from the Crypt. You even directed an episode. So let's talk about that. First of all, were you a fan of the comics before the show? I know they're a little before your time, but obviously they're being reprinted and passed around a bunch.
Yeah, I never fell in love with the comics. I did read them when they were, bound in hardcover and whatnot, back in the 80s and 90s. But I did know the Amicus movie, and I really was creeped out by the Amicus movie from the 70s.
Interesting. And then how did you get involved writing on the show?
I have a theory of how I got involved with the show. There's a wonderful lady who's no longer with us, Mary Ellen Trainor, who played the mom in Monster Squad.
Yep.
Mary Ellen was married to Robert Zemeckis. And I'll never forget, Shane Black and I were writing something for John Carpenter and Walter Hill at Universal. We had a bungalow at the back of Universal. And it was not that far from Amblin, the Amblin complex. So we were sitting there one day and the phone rings and our assistant answers the phone and she goes, yeah. And then she hangs up and she turns to me and she goes, Robert Zemeckis wants to see you. Now, I had never met Robert Zemeckis. This is a huge hero of mine, one of the greats. And I'm like, holy crap, what? And I said, well, when? She goes, now, if you're free. And I said, well, I'm free. And it's the equivalent of like walking one block, a block and a half. So I walked over to Amblin, went in, said, Bob Z wants to see me. And I sat down with him and he asked me to write the first Tales from the Crypt. And I think that Mary Ellen felt bad that Monster Squad hadn't done all that well.
Mm.
And she was sort of my little angel, like looking over my shoulder, like, Fred's, he's doing okay, but, maybe we should throw him a bone. And so she suggested to Bob, and I guess Bob knew my work. I know he did because he was at the premiere of Monster Squad.
Yeah.
So I think Mary Ellen was my little angel in disguise.
No, when how did they pitch it to you? I mean, because the show obviously hadn't come out yet. They were still kind of putting this thing that was kind of different together, on this new channel that was finding its voice. How did they pitch you on it?
Well, they picked the right guy because I knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I had looked at a lot of the comics, and particularly the artists. I mean, the stories are great, the art is great. I mean, the EC comics are really terrific, almost all of them. So I knew what it was, and I knew that they wanted to sort of reinvent it. Nobody ever talked about it being user friendly. I think the danger element of it, the kind of tawdry element of it was important, but there wasn't I didn't get a lot of kind of direction about how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob wanted to do an All Through the House, which they had done in the Amicus film.
Right.
Very well, by the way.
Okay, so, but how did you go about readapting the Amicus episode?
Well, I think, first of all, it wasn't so much a remake of the Amicus episode as a new translation to film of the Tales from the Crypt story. And by the way, that might have been a Haunt of Fear. It might have been a Haunt of Fear or one of the other titles.
Right, but the Amicus one still existed and you were aware of it, so it's still
in your head. I mean, I don't remember Bob having really any kind of specific ideas about. I think we just sort of knew what it needed to be, and we just did it. I don't remember us, sweating about it at all.
Well, because the biggest difference is the depiction of Santa Claus, the Santa Claus killer. In that one, he's very quiet, subdued, and this one, he's more like, foaming at the mouth.
Yeah. But part of that had to do with the actor and the choices that Bob made as a director.
Mm-hmm.
But the fun part was, and I've been a fan of Bob's for a long time, and what was fun was to kind of be in the mad scientist laboratory, because we broke it. We broke the story. That's what you call when you come up with the story for something. We broke the story so beat by beat by beat, and it was a real graduate school in suspense, because Bob would constantly come, okay, well, she's got the key, but then she drops it and it goes under the floorboards, and then she's reaching for it, but there's another key. It's like, how do you top yourself by constantly, pulling the rug out from the character and then throwing them a bone and then pulling the rug out again? And if you look at that episode, it's that the whole way through. Like, it's like, I got good news. Yeah, but there's bad news. Yeah, but I got good news. Yeah, but I have bad news. And so that was a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, because especially because those comics are so short, you want to fit them into 25-ish minutes.
Yeah. So how do you make how do you make a meal out of it?
Exactly. So you don't want to pad it, but you have to give it more meat on the bone. So that's interesting how he thought of that. Did you have any other?
It goes to Hitchcock in a way. It's like, how do you make a sequence out of something, as opposed to just, well, this happens and this happens. Well, but what are the obstacles, and how does the character overcome the obstacles? And once they've done that, is the problem over? Is the danger gone, or now is there a new danger? Again, it was a real object lesson.
And then, how did you go about translating a visual style and the tone from a comic to a screenplay?
I think, again, I don't think we really discussed it. I think we understood. I did, from being a nerd, and he did from also liking those comics, that the tone was, it was sometimes tongue in cheek, but it was also very raw. So it kind of takes the curse off being tongue in cheek, because it can get really dark and creepy and scary. So it was just it was not that different really from Monster Squad. Monster Squad is, you know, kind of in a different. It's got a different parabellum than that, but it's the same idea of let's do a joke now, and now let's do something scary, and now let's do another joke, and it's just being aware to not be afraid of something getting a laugh, but definitely making sure that something is challenging and scary when you're not doing the laugh.
Yeah. And then obviously you did another episode, Only Skin Deep, you know, within the same season. So did that just come right after, or was there a pause between the first?
Actually, what's speaking to my hat I'm wearing, Steven Spielberg was going to direct Only Sin Deep. And I still have a memo from him about the tone of what that was. And then because he's not ever busy at all or doing anything else, we lost him, and Howard Deutsch came on board. And Howie had, I think he was married to Leah Thompson at that time. So that was a match sort of made in heaven. Like Leah would play the part and he directed it. And, you know, we can go through episode by episode, but I really don't remember sitting down with the other directors and saying, well, what about this? What about that? Except with Bob on the first one. I think in a weird sort of way, and part of this has to do with Joel Silver, who's always been a huge supporter of mine. I love Joel. I think he's great. And I think he just trusts me to do things. You know, he's brought me in on a couple of his feature films to do just some potchkeying and to spit shine scenes and stuff like that. And he never tells me what to do. He's just like, make this better. Hey, Dekker, this is bad. This needs work. Make it better. So that was my experience on all of Tales from the Crypt. Was I just kind of had I had the run of the place. It was pretty great.
Sin Deep is a really great episode on many levels, but the casting of Leah Thompson playing so hard against type really
100%
set a precedent that I think really makes the show zing on many different levels, where the audience wants to see that, but then it shows the actors, hey, I can do something that no other movie or show would really let me do just for like a half hour.
I think that was one of the great gifts of that series, is you got these wonderful actors who got to do something outside their wheelhouse. That's why they did it. Like, oh, I can play a part I've never played before.
Right. But I think she was such America's sweetheart that it really kind of set the template for that. Especially
really
in that first
season. Really pathetic in that, really sad. And yeah, it was great.
But but I just watching it like a day or so ago, like she's having so much fun now, and that it really comes through. You can tell when an actor is like, okay, I finally get to do something different, and I really want to go for it.
Right.
It really comes across, and the audience picks up on that energy.
Yeah.
And then you got to direct an episode.
Yes.
So how'd you get there? And how was it different writing and directing? Was it any different?
No, it wasn't. I mean, you know, the only difference was, instead of just, you know, going to the set and hanging out, I actually had to direct the episode. And, you know, I don't remember why that particular one was the one that I wanted to do. Well, it has a zombie in it, so that may have been, I want to do a zombie episode. Right. I liked the glamour of it. I liked the photographer and the model, and, you know, it was kind of sexy. And, you know, I'm always a sucker for romance. If there's a way to shoehorn a little romance in something, I will always do that. So it had all those things. It had a romance. It had some sort of sexy visuals because it was about a photographer and a model. And then there was a horrible grisly zombie at the end. And I got to work with Miguel Ferrer.
Yes. Yeah, I want to talk about him because he's, again, there's another hugely underrated actor that I don't think has really gotten his due. And he was actually in like 3 or 4 episodes. He had some smaller bits in some of the other episodes.
But I used him first.
Yeah. Well, that, and he'll always remember him in RoboCop.
Oh, of course.
And tell me about working with him and how he got into the state to play like such an intense evil character.
Miguel is was one of the great guys of all time, and one of the things that was great about him was there was no hand wringing. There's no going off into the corner and get like kind of what you're alluding to, like how do I get a head of steam going to play this guy. He's like, how's it going? Like he was just so easy. And then we just, and action, and boom, and there he's the guy. And then as soon as it's over, cut, okay, and then he's making a joke, and he was just so easy and just great.
I guess that's like the magic of acting that the non-actor people just don't understand, is how you can go from, being yourself to being this totally other personality.
I love actors for just that reason, that they're all different. They all have their own way, and some actors can be really annoying because of their approach, but whatever works, it's only when it doesn't work, when their approach is actually not helping, that can be a problem. But Miguel was one of my favorite experiences with an actor ever.
And then I love the effects in this, and I didn't realize that for at least some shots, the zombie at the end was a puppet.
Yes.
Until a collector friend of mine actually found the puppet.
Yep. Yeah. The whole upper torso.
So kind of which shots did you use for each one?
Well, now that you mention that, I haven't thought about this literally in years. And I can't remember why we did that.
I don't know if it's like coming up from the ground or like some of the overhead shots.
Well, some of that was Kyle coming out of the ground. It may have had something to do with close-ups, because whenever you take flesh away from, whenever a character has to be sculpted, if you look at it too carefully, you can see that it's built up onto flesh, and in this case, the flesh is missing. So I may have done that just because I wanted it to look like the flesh was actually gone. It was actually skeletal.
Yeah, now that thinking through the sequence, I think it's when Miguel.
There's definitely a close up. I know that.
Yeah, where he has. I think it's when Miguel has his flashlight and he shines it right on them, and the worms are like kind of coming out. I think it's that's what it was. So the worms kind of coming out of the face.
That's why I think the worms had a lot to do with it too.
Which is, God, again, that's another one I very distinctly remember as a kid being scared and feeling many other things from the Terry Hatcher side of it.
Yes.
All coming together at the same time, and like, okay, this is something I haven't really seen before.
You're making me want to see this again, because now that I think about it, that all that stuff was intentional, and to have that all in one episode, it's like, here, everything you want is here.
Right. You're going, your middle schooler demographic on that one.
I'm checking all the boxes. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And that was before Terry really. That was, by the way, before Terry really took off in any way. It was before Desperate Housewives. I'd seen her
that was before Lois and Clark too.
Yeah, way before that. And I'd seen her in a independent film with Kevin Bacon, and just sort of fell for her instantly. And it was like, I want her. And I said, hey, Joel, I want this girl, Terry Hatcher. He goes, fine, great. It was so easy. Tales from the Crypt was so easy because you had a support system. Joel and Bob Zemeckis and Walter Hill and David Giler, they were all, they're just great.
All right, and then I just want to touch on Lower Birth is another one you wrote, which again is kind of the backstory of the Crypt Keeper character itself.
That's right.
And what I love about this episode, again, it's another kind of running theme or setting in the Crypt universe, is the carnival, which again, when these were wrote, that was like the big attraction. You didn't really have movies. Most people couldn't afford the movie, or they couldn't go to a movie because they just weren't nearby. But you had these traveling carnivals. Yeah, and it's such a rich setting for macabre. And then we have this kind of like, again, you said you're drawn to the romance of these characters. So how do you go about making the audience feel this connection and empathy for a mummy and a two-faced sideshow character?
Well, you dramatize the pain of having that life.
Mm.
And back to goes back to the Elephant Man,
Mm.
David Lynch, R.I.P. Just having having a character who's has obstacles in their life, and are troubled, and playing that as opposed to depicting them as monsters. I mean, that goes back to Frankenstein's monster. I mean, that's the key. So basically I'm just doing the same thing over and over again.
Well, you're very good at it.
Well, thank you.
Now again, when you're adapting these comics, there's a lot of like always little bits are a little funny reading back on the times, and I'm sure they were meant to be jokey then, but are even jokier now. Because in the comic on that one, I was just kind of reading through it earlier. There's a scene where apparently the Mummy and the Two-Faced Man go to a justice of the peace in the middle of the night and ask for a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives it to them because they smell bad, so he thought they were drunk, and it turns out he's blind, so he can't see. But again, how did they ask for this, and why would they care about a marriage license?
I think the writers over there at Tales from the Crypt were maybe had a few too many drinks. That's probably what happened.
Right. I'm like, I kind of would love to see someone try to make that scene work in some manner, just for the absurdity of it.
It's not that much. It's not that much goofier than a lot of the episode as it is. But really, the key to that episode was Kevin Yeager, who created the Crypt Keeper and built him and puppeted him, and he wanted to direct an episode, and so it made perfect sense that it's the birth of the Crypt Keeper. So that was fun.
Yeah, and I wish he would do more directing. I know he had a really bad experience on this Hellraiser movie, but that episode really kind of shows that he has, the chops for it.
Totally. Great director and one of the great guys of all time.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then you did one last episode, another classic, Split Personality, directed by Joel Silver himself.
Correct. And filmed at a Lloyd Wright house in Palos Verdes, because if it's Frank Lloyd Wright or Lloyd Wright, that Joel is not going to be too far away.
Right.
And that was fun. That was fun. I got to work with Joe Pesci.
Yeah. So tell me about working with Joel in that capacity.
I think, he's made enough movies that it wasn't a stretch for him to direct an episode. The twins were friends of his prior to the series. I mean, prior to this episode. So it may be that he earmarked that episode because of them, but I honestly don't know. But that was fun.
Yeah, it almost feels like Joel's like, well, no one can say no to me, so I'm going to bring in my favorite writer. I'm going to bring in my favorite actors. With Joe Pesci and Burt Young.
I think there's some truth to that. Yeah, and he knew Joe from the Lethal Weapon movies.
Right. And when I talked to Alan Gill, they're like, well, we had, the one thing we did, we had to put him on a time schedule, and he didn't like that. He wanted more time for everything, and they're like, no, we have to get this done by this time.
Right.
They kind of wanted him to feel their pain to a degree.
Yeah, so he complains, but he got it done. Yeah. Also, that wasn't a very difficult episode. There weren't a lot of effects, and there wasn't. The mechanics of it were pretty simple.
Well, okay, but that ending effect again is
which one?
With Joe Pesci split in half, and then there's a camera shot.
Yeah,
that goes all the way around.
Yeah, well, that's Kevin Yeager.
Mm-hmm.
You throw him a challenge, and he comes back fighting, and it's even better than you thought it would be.
Now, when you wrote it, was Joe Pesci cast?
No.
So, obviously, Joe Pesci brings Joe Pesci to his role.
Yeah. And he changed some lines. He said, "Is it okay if I do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, great. Make it your own."
Yeah, you're not going to say no to Joe Pesci.
No.
Well, my favorite is because he's playing dual characters, or pretending to be dual characters.
Right.
So he plays the LA guy, and he's talking. He's got his like ponytail and his LA affect.
Yeah.
And
totally forgot about that. Yeah.
He keeps singing "I'm too sexy." It's really funny.
Yeah.
Again, all these episodes are extremely memorable. So I hope you're very proud of them, and because they're all fan favorites.
Well, I appreciate that, and I guess I do. I mean, that was one of the fun things about that series. I mean, if you're doing, because I worked on other TV series. I mean, it's kind of the same. Like I worked on Star Trek Enterprise, and it was like, okay, we're doing that again, and now we're going to do that again, and it was sort of doing the same thing every week. Whereas with this, I mean, all of my episodes are just completely different casts, different sets, different stories. It was like, that's very fun to not fall into the trap of doing the same thing over and over again.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of the allure, but also part of the fear of the show. It's exciting to do something different, but then you're doing something different and you have to like be careful because you don't want to be the one that breaks it.
Well, also in television, generally, I think the people who run the networks and own the stuff, they want things to be sort of the same.
Yeah.
For budgetary reasons, for contractual reasons, and to create a whole new world for each episode of Tales from the Crypt was pretty great. And it's not done very often. I mean, anthology shows are basically have been dead for years and years. There used to be a lot of them, Twilight Zone and whatnot, but now it's. I mean, I think they think it's cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I mean, there's like Creep Show. There's a couple things kind of floating around.
Creep Show is so cheap, though. It's so cheap.
Right. Yeah, like Dr. Greg.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is that there's like almost like a social contract between like the audience and the TV makers. They're like, okay, we want to come and see this thing every week. And if you go too far, you might lose us. And I think that's what the studios are afraid of because they want people to show up next week.
Right. Well, the beauty of Tales from the Crypt was that the further we went, the better it was for the audience. The more you break them.
Well, I think traditionally they're coming back because they like the characters so much in the story, and they know what the story is going to be. But I think in Tales from the Crypt, they know it's more they know it's going to be scary, they know it's going to be sexy, they know it's going to be gory. They know they're more into those elements, and the characters have to be reinvented every time. But they did such a good job reinventing that that's why it was successful. That's why it's so hard to replicate.
Yeah. Also, I have to say, most Tales from the Crypts from the beginning, when Gaines and those guys created it, they were morality tales. And morality tales tend to be about people who aren't that nice and who get their comeuppance.
Yeah.
As opposed to most of television, which has its bad guys, but is mostly about characters that you want to see every week because you care about them. You don't care about anybody in Tales from the Crypt.
I care about Terry Hatcher. I think that we can all agree.
Fair enough.
We want her to be happy.
Fair enough.
Obviously, you've worked on many things that I'd love to talk to you about. We only have so much time, but one of the more interesting ones, and I think partly because it's having a bit of a resurgence, is your work on The Predator. The franchise is kind of having a moment right now. I don't know if you saw the latest, the Killer of Killers anthology animated. I thought it was fantastic. We got a new movie. So things are looking bright, but I also like to look back a little bit. And you worked on the one Shane Black did, and it went through many changes that have been, talked about. Is there like an official cut that Shane has that he like, if he ever wants to like dust off, or is he just like disowned it, or like if there was going to do a Shane Black cut, does that kind of thing exist?
I don't think so. I think the changes that were made, and I was not privy to why exactly they were made. It's a very expensive movie. I mean, there are more expensive movies, but that was pretty expensive. And we had a whole different sort of third act set piece that we wrote and that we were prepping. And then I was out of the loop on why we took a radically different direction, which we ended up doing. I mean, we had a kind of a Road Warrior set piece with half tracks and moving vehicles and predators. And that was going to be the finale. And now it's them sort of running around in the jungle. So I don't know if it was a budget thing or what, but I have very mixed feelings about the movie. I was very, very pleased and happy to be involved, and Shane is one of my dearest friends, and that was really cool. And I got to spend some time in Vancouver and made a lot of money and all that. But to be completely candid, me personally, I think that the first movie is pretty terrific, Predator, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I don't think we need anything after that. I think it's one and done, and I feel that way about a lot of franchises. It's like, why are we still doing this? We did it. It's done. Why do we keep going back to this well over and over again? And I'm not just talking about the Predator. I'm talking about a lot of IP that people love.
A lot of it again comes back to the money of it. If it's successful once, hopefully it'll be successful again. Again, one of the things I liked about the Predator a lot that I wish we could have gone more of or was expanded, in the later film, was the mythology building, that the little seeds that were being built about genetics and why the Predator is doing what it's doing beyond just for hunting.
Right.
That's all the stuff that I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
And we enjoyed doing that, but it was never fully baked. And the problem with any franchise is, the great thing about Tales from the Crypt was Joel and Bob Z and all those guys they gave me the keys to the car. They go, drive it wherever you want. Whereas something like the Predator or Star Trek has just this backlog of people who are looking over your shoulder to make sure you don't do something wrong. And that's the first way to kill creativity. Right. First thing, to forget about it.
Well, that's part of the beauty of the Tales from the Crypt, because it doesn't cost much, and if one doesn't work, you just reset for the next week. Where there's like they're worried about it could kill a whole franchise. Right. Obviously, you can't kill the Predator, for too long.
Well, one of my favorite things in the Predator is, I love the cast. All those guys and gals were just lovely and wonderful, and I loved hanging out with them, and they were great, and they brought real life to it, and they brought a lot of the dialogue to life. But for my money, the secret underground lab that's the kind of stuff. I'm a big James Bond fan. Like, what? The new Predator movie has a secret underground lab? That's cool. So, but again, how many Predator movies do we need, really?
Yeah, again, these last two, which again I feel like they're kind of doing very smartly in how they're crafting it. Yeah, to have like an overarching things are being revealed. It sounds like they have a plan, and that makes it.
Well, I haven't seen them. I do think that Prey was, which I also haven't seen. This is like you get in a car crash, you don't want to get in the car.
So I understand. Yeah.
But I think Prey, from what I hear, was kind of a genius idea, because you're taking something we all know, but you're turning it on its ear. And that to me is the key, I think, to a good sequel or a good series. It's like, we've seen that, but what have we not seen that's in the spirit of that?
Right.
So
that's where I think the animated one doubles down on that. So again, I'm sure it's a painful thing to watch, but if you ever have a wild hair, I recommend it.
Where is it?
They're both on Hulu.
There's an animated.
Yeah, it just came out like 2 weeks ago. Predator, Killer of Killers, and it's kind of 3+ segments, each taking place in different time periods.
Okay. Well, they're taking. Go ahead.
I don't want to spoil it because it would be more fun to just say, "Oh, okay, that's cool. Oh, wow, that's cooler. That's even cooler."
All right.
So, all right. But again, I really appreciate that you came on. The Tales from the Crypt fans always love hearing about how their favorite episodes came to be. And believe it or not, there's still more. There's still more growing. And, hopefully we'll get like proper releases on streaming and everything soon. And, you can get those residual checks coming in. Now, do you have anything that you're working on now that you want to talk about?
I am working on something, but I cannot talk about it.
Okay, understood.
But
A quick double back. You mentioned
yes.
that you were working on something for Walter Hill and John Carpenter. Can you say what that was?
That was a script that Shane wrote on spec called Shadow Company. And it was essentially a Vietnam horror film involving resurrected Vietnam soldiers. And Universal optioned it. I don't know if they bought it wholesale, but John was interested in directing it, and Walter was going to produce it. And it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. We worked on it for about a year, but eventually it ran out of gas and they decided not to do it.
Yeah. Well, I always love to hear what could have been with, amazing directors and writers, the streets of Hollywood are paved with those scripts.
Yeah, it was cool. It was very ambitious, but just to sit in a room with John Carpenter and Walter Hill was worth it, and to get paid to sit in a room with them. That was pretty great.
Great. All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Are you on any socials that you want people to follow you on?
Nope.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for listening. I would really appreciate if everyone would give Dads from the Crypt a rating and review on iTunes, a rating on Spotify, a like and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us at Dads from the Crypt Talk on TikTok. And with that, I thank you for listening to Dads from the Crypt.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.